Welcome to STEMculture.
Oh, I fucked up.
All right, we have an intro.
Guys, it's really warm in here.
Welcome to STEMculture Podcast, where we're beginning our second series, Work and Life and Balance. Today you'll be listening to Keighley, that's me,
And Dani.
And Zach.
We're taking on that infamous trio for the top of the new year, bringing it in with the convenient reminder to reset and rebalance. Today we take on work, everything from what goes on in a grad student's day to how we manage and try to optimize it all and make room for the rest of it.
This episode goes out to all the Hermione Grangers out there who have to magically do it all, but without the actual magical powers. So what does work-life balance all mean? To me, it is a balance between work, of course, personal, mental, social, and physical health. Anybody else have a contribution to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have the same feelings. And when I think about like my own interpretation of work-life balance, for me, that means for me to work productively, I also need to rest productively to make sure that I can balance the two of those things.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you guys are saying. It's the fact that we need to have all these components in our very complex lives, and they all need to be acknowledged and given space and more or less honored so that we can be complex, well-rounded humans and not overextend ourselves in any one direction.
I'm just really bad at it.
You're really bad.
I am.
Yeah.
But you're still alive and you're still doing things.
That you know of.
And you have...
Oh God, he's a ghost.
Okay, so that's our understanding of work-life balance. But I looked it up on Twitter. Well, there's like Twitter counters out there that will tell you how many times a hashtag has been used, usually within a certain number of days or up to a certain number of counts. And every single one that I checked for hashtag work-life balance maxed out the counters. So obviously people are talking about this, which either means it's working for a lot of people and so they're sharing their ideas, or it's not working for a lot of people and so they're lamenting the fact that hashtag work-life balance sucks. But overall, I think, even if you just do a cursory Google search, you find pages and pages and pages of articles written on this and people's approaches to this. So it's obviously a really popular concept. Why do you think work-life balance as an idea is so pervasive?
Well, I think it's the idea that it's a hard goal to attain. And I think part of that is because balancing the two looks different for different people. And I think we're also always chasing it because you see someone that you think has a good work-life balance. And so you're like, oh, I want to do that. So how do I do that? And then maybe you try what they're trying and it fails.
I agree with that one, but I also think that it's a difficult goal to achieve in the first place. And that to me, it seems nearly impossible in some cases. Like, I have to balance it. And it's also kind of leaning towards that healthy end too. Like, you need to be better. It's New Year's resolution time. You should be focusing on that. But then it's just, sometimes it seems like an impossible standard. So it's something you have to keep going back and forth on.
So kind of what I'm hearing you guys talk about is this idea that work-life balance is this constant desire to succeed, right? So what Dani was saying is, oh, so-and-so appears to have a really nice work-life balance. Like, I want to be successful like they are, so therefore it must be because they have their life in this potentially unattainable or unattainable to you in the way they're doing it, or attainable in the way that they're doing it way. And one thing I think that really takes this idea of why we try to be so successful and we try to constantly push our lives into this balance, and that talks about it really nicely, was the BuzzFeed article, the Millennial Burnout Generation article that was published a couple of weeks ago. And we'll link that in the show notes so that you guys can read that if you haven't seen it yet. But it was a really nicely written piece that, for me personally, caused a lot of feels. Have you guys read this article?
Yes. I read it and I'm so burned out, I couldn't even finish it.
It made me sad.
Yeah. I was already having a bad week and I was just like, I can't read the rest of this because it's just, I could identify with it in so many ways. It was a little too much for me.
So burnout was first coined by a psychiatrist in 1974, talking about, for people who may have not heard this term, which would be rather shocking if you haven't heard burnout by now. It's talking about the term when people overextend themselves to the point that they're not even stressed out anymore. They just do not have any more to give, and yet they keep giving because there are certain pressures on them to keep moving forward. And you're usually suffering in more places than just work. How do you guys think that the idea of burnout applies to work-life balance?
I mean, I think it's just one and the same. So what happens to me is I'll get really burned out on work, and then I can't work anymore. And what ends up happening is I binge an entire show in one day, or like on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Or I will start like reading for fun. So I'll go through all of my favorite books and I'll just start reading them nonstop. And that's just my brain's way of telling me I'm burned out on work and I need more balance. So I identify very much with burnout.
I do as well. I've had issues where I'll keep going and never stop. And then my kind of system recalibration is leaving town. I'm here almost every single weekend. And I don't go anywhere. I just lock myself in my office or my apartment and work on stuff for the lab. So to me, it's an opportunity to reset and kind of unburn a match, essentially. Because I know that article had like a burnout match on the front cover. And I was just like, can't undo that. Got to buy new matches. So you got to just replace everything. So I'll just leave town and try that.
Do you have any favorite places you like to go? Like, do you go really far away or do you just like go far enough?
So my family lives in town. Or not in town. They live in north of here, so about 2 hours away, so I can visit them. However, one of the common practices that I do for it, and this is something we'll discuss later in balance, is I'll go to an escape room.
Oh.
So I still get to use the thinky bits of my brain, but it's more of a challenge it's more of a fun challenge than an academic challenge. And so I've enjoyed just stepping away and doing that. I'm not an outdoorsy person. If that's not obvious, you can't tell that from my voice. But yeah, I don't go outside that often. So because that's a lot of the articles that I was looking at for this were like, go outside and recharge your batteries. I'm like, nah, pollen's out there. I don't want to go outside.
So when you're talking about those articles that you read about, you know, how people are suggesting to fix work-life balance and how to like adjust to burnout, you guys read or heard about anything else that like really sticks out to you?
I read an article, and it's from the University of Southern California, and it is stretched too thin, as what it was described as. 5 graduate student work-life balance tips. I have violated all of these. So the first one is be honest with friends and family. I've mentioned before I have a hard time saying no. And so if I don't have time to do something, I'll still accept the burden of it and still try to do it. Plan ahead. Don't wait till the last minute. That is like my family motto. I should put it on a crest. I'm notoriously last minute with some things, and often I find that it's not really my fault on that. It's other people who are affecting my schedule because I didn't tell them no in the first place, that they're going to come in and say, hey, I need this last minute, whether that's home or at work. And you're like, oh, I guess I won't go outside today or see the sun. I got to finish this. This is not as bleak as it sounds. I don't like the sun, so it's kind of a bonus. So there's a make a flexible schedule. Don't overbook. For me, I overbook myself to the degree where I have appointment after appointment after appointment. And these guys know I'll come late to something, or I'll go to a meeting where we're all together and be like, okay, you guys stay and chat. I got to go to another meeting. See y'all later.
And you come back to the meeting that we're still having.
Yeah. We have long meetings. Get used to that in grad school. And then it says reevaluate your daily activities and responsibilities. I haven't done that in a while. I probably need a good self-reflection. Is that something y'all have done recently where you're like, oh, I've got to really do this. I can't do that other thing, though. If y'all had that situation arise?
Yeah, I'm always reevaluating what my priorities are with work-life balance. So sometimes for me, and I've never really read anything on work-life balance, but for me coming into grad school, I knew very much I wanted to make grad school a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 kind of deal. And my advisor, I asked him what was his expectations, and he said, well, treat it like a job, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I was like, yes, say more. And then he was like, it's really up to you. Sometimes you'll be here longer than that, depending on your goals, or you're going to not be here as long, and it's really up to you. And so for me, that worked really well because I don't like to be micromanaged, and I manage myself pretty well. But sometimes I'm like, I actually do need to be in the lab a bunch. So Zach and I one summer spent, yes, it was our first, my first full summer here as a grad student. And the two of us plus our friend Farzaneh, we're in our lab for 10-hour days every day of the week for a full month.
My hand still can't get out of the pipette position.
Yeah, and
It's
we
stuff
had
like that.
yes, and we had certain goals. There was a grant deadline coming, and we needed to get that done before classes started, because we all recognized that as soon as classes and teaching started up again, that we would not be able to finish this in time to analyze the data to get the grant in. So reevaluating priorities is something I do frequently. And then also sometimes I become a workaholic, like right now. And I'm kind of addressing that with myself, and it's trying to pull back. Because for me, I start making mistakes when I start making mistakes when I'm really burnt out. And making mistakes in a lab can be dangerous, you know?
Yes.
And not only to me, but to others. And so, you know, once I can recognize that I'm having this burnt out feeling, I feel like I'm not paying as close attention and being as perhaps safe as I should be. I really have to pull back. So I'm really trying to do that now. So this weekend that we're recording is a 3-day weekend, and this is the only kind of workish thing I'm doing. Nothing else besides this.
Do you reevaluate your schedule frequently?
Yes and no. So we'll get to this later, but it was kind of once I started reassessing where I was spending my time, that I realized I needed to be more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Picky?
Like mentally aware of like what I was actually doing with my time. Because I had a similar problem that Zach has, where I say yes to a lot of things. Things make sense, and like, this is really interesting, this is really exciting, this will help me with my career, this is something I'm passionate about. And I end up having 4 or 5 calendars that are all laying on top of each other that dictate my life for me, and that wasn't really where I wanted it to be. I wanted to be more in control of it. So I started looking at where I was spending my time and what percentages of my time I was giving to certain things. And that helped me reflect and be like, okay, not enough time is going here. I need to push more time in this other thing. Or I'm spending, too much time on this per week. I can divvy this up, or take a week on, take a week off. I really kind of think about that. It's definitely not a perfect process. And the tough part about being a grad student is every semester changes. I think this kind of gets into the idea of like a grad student work life, not like work and life, but like the work part of a grad student's job or career. It's this idea that, you have semester responsibilities that can change from, even week to week, but typically, you have a teaching load that changes, and you might be teaching different days of the week, and you might be taking classes that are different and at different times of the day. And your research priorities might shift from semester to semester, causing you to have to be in the lab. Maybe if you're doing a new thing, you need to be in the lab where you can be mentored, which means you have to somehow fit research in like a 9 to 5, if that's when your advisor will be around to help you. But for a typical STEM student, I think those are kind of the big 3 rotating time strains in a week, is research, classes, and teaching. Do you guys have any other major work components that should be included in that list?
Writing.
That's right.
Lit searches.
I'm really bad at that.
Meetings and seminars.
Yep. I have meetings, teaching, research, writing, lit search, and then repeat, because that's all I do anymore. It's
so weird to me, because I'm like I hear those and I'm like, oh, those are things on my calendar, but for some reason they don't fall into things I like categorize I actually acknowledge.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's writing. Well, like in my brain that falls under research.
Yeah.
So I guess it's interesting to hear how people categorize their responsibilities, and how far down the chain do you sub-separate, and does that help you to have more categories, or does it help to keep things in a broader sense?
Well, it helps me protect my time. So I kind of schedule out by semester for myself, but also for my lab mates. And so I will say, okay, here are the times I'm writing so that I can protect that time. And then here are the times I'm doing lab work so that I can protect that time. And then other meetings and other seminars. And it's all in an effort to protect the time so that other people can't take it from me.
So that, we talked a little bit about like how your life changes on a semesterly basis, how we both kind of address our situations from a really broad perspective. For people who may not yet be in grad school, let's talk about what a work situation may look like for typical daily or weekly strain, just so we can get a better sense of what that that stressor or that strain feels like.
Okay. I'll start off with my week. So it varies as you progress through your program. So for the first 2 years, I can say probably most of us are in classes. And then after that, you don't take classes anymore. Celebrate that. Enjoy it. Never take a test again, except it's all prelims or oral exams. So have fun with that. There's a transition between being a student and being a researcher and a teacher. And that's something that a lot of us will hit teacher right when we start. Most STEM programs will have you teaching labs as soon as you start your career there. The thing I've noticed is there's a transition of you might have fewer responsibilities depending on what courses you're teaching. So I know that when I teach like a general chemistry course, it's a pretty quick go. There's stuff already prepared for me and it's ready to be just taught because there's like 50 sections of it and everybody's just got to go through it as quickly as possible. And then there's other courses that are more in depth, maybe sophomore to senior level courses, and those require a lot more effort on my part. That's prepping solutions from a chemical perspective and doing all this extra work on top of teaching the lecture or teaching the lab and then grading the assignment. So I think another thing, teaching, I would bulk together grading, like you were saying, what goes where. To me, grading could be both its own category because it takes so much time to do versus teaching. And then over time, you're just, like Keighley mentioned, once you have a grant, you don't do that for a while. And it's magical. And it's the best feeling ever when you're like, you mean I can just sit in a lab and do research, or I can sit at my computer and write and look at data? That's what I dream about.
But like, so it's interesting you bring that up because like, even just like from a component of just work balance, not even, you know, considering your balance outside of your work hours, for me, it's super weird to have taken away, even like, I'm okay with like not having classes because those were already pretty much a non-strain on my day. They were really late at night. It really didn't matter if, you know, they didn't affect my like typical working hours. But having teaching kind of removed from my research balance, or trying to balance my research and my teaching, it's good in that it allows me to do more research. That's like an obvious time shift. But from like a mental perspective, trying to balance now going a long time without having success, you know, from a daily perspective. Okay, well, I felt like I did a lot today, but then at the end of the week, you're like, oh, well, I didn't get these 3 experiments done that I thought I was going to be able to. And then you look at your month and, oh, well, okay, I thought this was going to happen, but then like my cell line got sick and I had to throw it away and start over. And so you start realizing that there's like this very long, arduous process that is research. And with teaching, even though it's really tough and it does take a lot of hours sometimes, especially depending on the course you're teaching, it's so variable. But it is kind of this instant gratification of, at the very least, well, we got through another week. Like my students have learned another chapter. I have graded these papers. That's like something I can check off my list. It's not just this ongoing process. And so for me, it's really important that like my work day has moments of instant gratification because I'm not one of those researchers that loves the long haul. I love research for what it stands for, but I'm not necessarily so in love with it that I'm okay with just going months without a lot of progress or feeling the slippage and not like beating myself up about it. So it's important for me to have like other things that I consider work. So in a previous episode, Dani was talking about like an outreach organization that we were working on, and that has now become part of my work because it has now gotten a paid position. And so if I treat that as kind of my stand-in for teaching, where I get instant gratification from that because, okay, I completed a presentation. Okay, I sent the emails I needed to send. Okay, I've written the documents I need to. And so just even balancing your work responsibilities from a mental perspective, how that affects me.
Mm-hmm. And then for me, I'm in my 4th year and hoping to graduate this year, as is Zach. And right now, I'm really lucky where I'm on a research assistantship, which means I'm not teaching. And I don't have classes. And so really, I just have lab work and writing. And for me, I really love that. It's not scary to me because I'm pretty good about managing that time. And I have times, like I've mentioned already, that I write every day and that I do lab work. Except in the first week of classes when I have 15,000 meetings.
So many meetings.
That's just new semester woes.
Yes. So for me, I am just so happy when really all I'm doing is lab work and writing. And for me, especially with the writing, I keep track of what I'm working on and how many hours I get done a week. So I can kind of total that up at the end and be like happy feelings about how I've progressed on that.
I can see how that would like add to that instant gratification. Well, I put in this many hours this week.
Yeah.
Like that's got to help you feel good because measuring your progress like that's a really good idea.
Yeah. And then and we can talk about this later, but I have semester goals too that I write down for the lab. Well, actually, it's not semester goals right now. It's like in the next 2 months, what do I have to get done so that I have all my data? And so having that in a written format makes me feel really good too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what it looks like for me right now.
I kind of want to continue on that through the next question we have here, because Dani created this really amazing document for our department that talks about the different requirements, demands, responsibilities, etc., and how they change through grad school. And so if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing why you created that document and how you think it is helping.
So for me, I definitely, and I think a lot of people will identify with this, I will not be able to see the forest for the trees. So that means I'm only able to see these really small details and I can't plan out beyond that. And I can't look at the big picture. And so to help me see the big picture, I thought, why don't I make a visual timeline? I'm also someone who's very visual. If I have a list of things, I just need to see it in a timeline if it's a chronological list. So I started making this timeline where I said, okay, so like year 1 and 2, this is when people are getting adjusted to grad school. So what are some of the things at our university that they can take advantage of during this time so that they can set themselves up for success later on? So that was for year 1 and 2. And then in the next part of the timeline is basically like year 3 and 4 together. And in our program, kind of end of year 2 is when we take our written prelims, and then the beginning of year 3 is when we are supposed to defend our proposal, or other universities that might be kind of an oral defense of your proposal. Depends. Everyone has different names for it. It's ridiculous. Anyway, and so I wanted to make something visual for that too. Keep in mind that for this, there are some rules in the grad handbook that you need to pay attention for to reach this timeline and that timeline. And you should start writing at this point if you haven't already, because if you want to get out on time, you need to have submitted a paper, and sometimes papers in review, depending on kind of what your specialty is, what department you're in, what science you do, can take much longer than others. And so if you want to get out of here, so our university gives us 5 years. So if you want to get out of here in 5 years, then you need to really think ahead of time. So the whole goal of the timeline was, how do I see the big picture and keep it in mind so that I can be successful over the long term?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we talk about, how we kind of consider this change of grad school, I think it would be really interesting to promote a conversation with our listeners about how their programs might be different. Because I know a lot of different programs have a lot of variability. When I was applying, for example, like one of the schools I was applying to straight up didn't have teaching requirements. Like they would not let you teach because they were such a rigorous university that like didn't want you teaching. I don't know. And then another one like didn't let you teach in your first year, but then you're expected to teach like years 2 through 4. Mm-hmm. So it'd be really interesting to hear what people's alternate program timelines look like. Because I know there's a lot of variability between schools.
Oh, definitely. Then even departments here, y'all have way different requirements than I do. So I have 3 oral exams to graduate.
Oh gosh.
And I have entrance exams as well. So we have to pass ACS exams in order to remain in the program.
What is ACS?
American Chemical Society.
Oh, no.
So we have to pass 3 of those, including the one in our division.
So wait, you guys are like real intense grad students. Like I feel like I've been skating a little bit, but like y'all are legit serious.
It's very serious, and I think to even that out, they pulled back on our coursework.
Okay.
So I know like in the environmental science department, they have to take 6 or more classes and then take written exams on those their second year. Okay. I don't do that. I have an oral exam instead on my second year. I have one on my third year. 4th year, write a report and let your committee know how you're doing. 5th year, hopefully defend.
get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And like we know people in like a psychology program that they don't actually do the equivalent of like their oral prelims until their 4th-ish year, which is crazy to me because that doesn't seem like a proposal. It seems like here's what I've been doing. I'm halfway or more done with my PhD, which is weird because they actually have like real data or like papers published.
Yeah, before they've even proposed. Yeah.
So it's really interesting, the different dynamics. And I don't even know anything about the TEM part of STEM and how, math or engineering or, computer science people, how they go about it either. Like I have no clue.
So if you want to educate us, hit us up on our Twitter.
I think the best thing we could say here is if you have something that worked really well for you, this would be the time to share it. There are a lot of students that struggle with funding or managing their time and everything like that. So reach out to us and by proxy, reach out to everyone else and say, hey, you're in history or you're in chemistry or whatever field you're in. I found this grant. It really helped when I was struggling with finances or anything along that lines or helped my research. You should apply to it too. Cycles start now or anything like that. So share that information with others and us and we'll be glad to disperse it to them as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Having a better understanding of how people in other places do their grad student work can help other people by default.
Because universities have different resources. For example, ours will provide multiple ways to find funding. However, there's sometimes a paywall between that, and not every university is going to cover that. And there are some that are free that could easily get to. For example, UCLA has GRAPES for funding. So I would suggest you take a look at those. I don't know what GRAPES stand for. They don't tell you.
I was going to say, like, does it involve wine?
It might. I don't know. I've looked and it's like, we call it grapes. And then that's the only explanation they give. There's no other, because it's an acronym for, no, it's just that we call it grapes. So take a look at that if you're interested in finding funding. It's free, it's open, and it's available. And there's some great stuff for ABD, anything else like that you're looking for.
So with all of that on our plate, and Zach kind of hinted at this earlier, sometimes it's really hard to say no.
Well, the way I've been dealing with that lately is I'll say yes, but only if I'm paid. And then immediately when I say that only if I'm paid part, people go, whoa, I'm never asking her for anything again. Or occasionally it works. So that's how I've been dealing with it.
Don't plan so last minute and be better about that. That's
right.
what I would have to say. And I can't talk because I need no tattooed on my arm, so I'd remember to say it because I don't ever.
Yeah, but then you have this great new technique you've been using where instead of saying no, you just avoid people, which I think is great.
It helps being nocturnal.
It helps being nocturnal. I work very late at night trying to avoid other people. But my other thing is I've gotten to the point where I have meetings Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I teach Monday, Wednesday. And so now I'm like, I looked at my calendar after this horrible week of 15 meetings. I looked at it and I was like, oh, I have nothing on Tuesday or Thursday. I'm staying home and writing, and no one can bother me.
Hey.
And I think the one thing I'll have to think or work on that is I love my phone and I love emails because it's like regular mail, but it's faster. And I love being able to be like, ooh, somebody's talking to me. I'm like, oh, that's an ad, delete. There's some satisfaction of getting an email. I don't know if it's just the nerd in me who's like, oh, it's so fast, it's so magical. But I think for me, I have to even disconnect the internet on my computer and be like, no, I'm not using this right now. If it's something I need to do, I'll write it down and I'll look it up later when I have a moment. Or I'll put my phone on Do Not Disturb so that nothing vibrates, buzzes, or distracts me while I'm in this zone.
Have you ever,
Go ahead.
Have you ever tried using, so there's some apps out there, one's called Forest, that will block all that stuff for you. And then if you just pick up your phone because you're so used to doing it to check it, Forest will be like, are you sure you want to do this?
I have the app installed. I didn't use it. Another thing that I've liked, and this is some useful focusing tools, is called Stay Focused. It's a Chrome browser extension. They have what I like to use is called the nuclear option, which is if you select it, it locks your browser from a specific list of websites. So I always put in YouTube. I'll leave Google Scholar open and stuff like that, but YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, and all that stuff, I'll force it to block it. And then if I go to that website, it's like, nah, you can't be here right now. It has bit me in the butt because I accidentally blocked Google. But then it comes to that whole, okay, I need to lock this down. I need to stop using the internet. Because Google leads you to some really weird places. And it also really is good at distracting me. And so this is nuclear, don't focus on anything else, only do whatever you're doing without the internet. And it prevents me from unplugging it. But if I need like a program, like say we use a cloud service to store all of our documents. So if I'm writing, I need that cloud service to function so that I can back up my files as I'm writing just in case something goes wrong. And this is an opportunity to keep me from being distracted from everything else. So one thing that I wanted to talk about was the 40-hour work week. And as grad students, I don't think we work that little amount every week. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I don't think that's a false statement. Dani may be better about it.
Dani may be better because that's one of the things you mentioned earlier that I really wanted to focus on too was if you're just now starting, have that conversation with your PI and say, what is a work week to you? Because some of them will say, I don't care when you're here as long as you get something done. Give me your phone number. I'll call you if I have a problem. And you can just go home and teedly-dee all you want wherever you want to go work, in a Starbucks, whatever. But some people, and there are some people in my department that their advisor expects them in their lab from 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock.
Aye.
Dinner time is fine. They are allowed to leave for food, and they're expected to work on Saturdays. And I might be making that harsher than it actually is. I don't know.
I met somebody who had that work expectation.
And like their week off is Sunday, or their day off is Sunday, and they don't have to come in. But most of the time they're in because they started an experiment and they have to finish it. But those guys, and this is the benefit, is they're guaranteed holidays. So if they're like, oh, well, MLK is coming up. Oh, well, I mean, it's going to be later than when we're releasing this. But you have that day off. You earn that. You've been working here. You got it. Spring break, you actually get spring break. Have a week. Go. So you have to outline that with somebody. And that's something that I find very important to do early on. Establish that timeline as soon as you can. But in the terms of 40-hour work weeks, we get a conversation about how much time we should be spending in the lab, teaching, and everything when we start. So our classwork and research is 40 hours a week. Anything additional should be about 20 hours. So we're expected to spend about 20 hours total teaching, whether that's in the lab, grading, or preparing, 20 hours. So you're looking at a 60-hour work week. Does anybody else feel that's very similar? Not looking at Dani because she has time management skills.
I think for our department, the teaching requirement is 15 hours, slightly less, but it wildly varies depending on where you're teaching. Freshman is probably closer to 15, but some of the upper levels can take more than the 20. So you're probably spot on with that 20 estimate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I don't want to make it out like I'm perfect. I'm absolutely not. But I think it's the way I categorize stuff. So some of the things I do that are meaningful to me outside of like my PhD. So our podcast, I don't consider that work. Right. I consider that as an extracurricular. But anyways, I probably am lying to myself about how many hours a week I'm working.
It's just different kinds of work, right? Like it's how do you, exactly what we were talking about before, like how do you subcategorize things? And I do the same thing where if it's not applicable to my PhD goal, it is a separate thing. Like that's not what I consider work. Yeah. That's what I consider career goals or career planning or networking or like all of these other gray space things that are still part of my eventual work, but like not immediately.
Yeah.
So on that topic, you said that if it's applicable to your PhD, do you consider teaching your responsibility towards your PhD? Other than it's a source of funding, and I understand that, is it part of your PhD?
So I'm, based on how I have in the past categorized it, it lives in a separate calendar. Like I have my calendar for my life, I have a calendar for my lab, and I have a calendar for teaching. So because of the way I would handle that, I think no. When I was not time tracking when I was teaching for very long, and so, but it did get tracked into a separate column outside of work. So I would say yes, I did treat teaching as not separate as like it's not work, but like as if I had a second job. Like I'm working my PhD and I'm working as a TA.
Okay.
And then I didn't work beyond teaching. So or like teaching was part of my 40-hour work week.
Okay.
But then
you integrated it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then there would be other times like during the summers where I would just be working my ass off getting data.
Right. Because then research took up more of that 40 hours.
And our teaching responsibilities get a little more laxed in the summer. I don't think we mentioned that earlier, but they do.
Yeah.
So one survey from The Atlantic found in 2014 that most employees accomplish their work, a survey found that the employees only spend about 40% of their time on actual primary duties. The rest of it, they're just messing around.
Solitaire.
Pinball if you're old school. I found this as an interesting statistic because I will admit there's times where I'm like, ooh, this YouTube video is funny and I'm on lunch, I'm going to watch it. And then I'll get into a rabbit hole and stick there for a little bit. But then in my mind, that guilt kicks in later and going like, you weren't there today mentally. You were watching stupid cat videos. You should get back to work. And so I'll go into the lab after like 7 o'clock and be like, I got to do something today. Mm-hmm. And so there's this interesting shift in what is a work week. Yeah. And in the 1998 paper state that 100 years ago, workers clocked an average of 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And that they rarely had a day to themselves because they would be working Monday through Saturday. And then Sunday they had church. Right. And so that was your opportunity. You had to go to church. You never had a day to yourself. So one person who really encouraged this shift, and I'll try to put citations for this on our page, was Henry Ford, because it was beneficial for him, one, to have his employees who were functioning properly, but also he noted that if they were out and about for 2 days on the weekend, they could at least spend money on his products or anything else. So it's an economic boost at that point. So
what a businessman.
Yes, very much a businessman. So currently we work about 4 more weeks a year than we did in 1979 in the U.S., a whole extra month. And then another interesting statistic is overworked overtime employees raises the rate of a mistake and a safety mishap by 61%.
I'm not surprised.
And I completely agree with that statistic, as I have worked really late at night and I've dropped something. I could correct it at that point, but if it was something that I wouldn't have, I probably would have broken down in the lab and just be like, light it on fire, it's time to restart. So,
I mean, Dani mentioned that earlier too, like when she was experiencing feelings of burnout, she noticed her work suffered.
It's very common. And a lot of them have even shown that you have lowered cognitive performance scores when you're overworked, or you're not really doing anything more than 40 hours a week, or you're not even doing your main primary duties. So I feel that it's very ineffective to work too hard. And this is more along the terms of balance in life. But I feel like this is something that you could consider when you're working is, am I functioning at peak capacity? And there's only so much caffeine you can consume before it kills you. Mm-hmm. It's a very high LD50, but you should be aware of that.
Fucking nerd. Well, the thing too with like these work weeks and the amount of time, it's not only us, the graduate students, that are putting in all this time and like, potentially overworking ourselves, but it's also the advisor, like we've kind of talked about. If they have a lot of expectations and they're putting a lot of pressure, they could potentially be putting a lot of pressure on you as well.
Like Zach said a comment like, okay, I was checked out at work today, and so I need to go back in and I need to work. Well, first of all, I don't hardly ever feel like that. And then I actually think about like, well, how much time was I actually spend? Like this whole conversation is making me rethink my life.
I'm so sorry.
Because like, I time track where it's like, okay, well, I spent time physically in lab today, but like how much of that time was actually spent being productive, and can I count that? And then I feel really bad about how many hours I'm actually putting into my work. And then people start thinking like, oh, Keighley works so hard. It's like, I don't. If I actually track productive hours, like, dude, like, no, like, I really, like, this is a problem.
Would you say 48% of it is actually productive?
But, I mean, I'm sure we're going to have a whole new episode about just imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. But it's very difficult for me personally to hear conversations about, like, how I spend my time, because I consistently feel that I present like I'm very busy. And this kind of, I've heard this before, like looking busy, fake busy, where you feel really busy, but then at the end of the day, like you've done nothing because you just kept doing a little things. Oh my God, I checked email 15 times today.
Fuck emails. I can't.
I don't know. I'm kind of where Zach, like I like getting emails because
I feel loved when I get an email. Don't judge me.
And stuff. I don't know.
So when I get them, that's fine. But then if I have to respond and send out emails, then all of a sudden I've sent out 1 million emails in one day, and my brain is like, you could put it through a sieve. It's so mushy.
I'm sure I wouldn't survive as, like, my brain would not handle it well because I don't really like monotony forever. But like, there's a lot of days where I'll be like doing administrative tasks, like sending emails. I'm like, what if I just become a secretary? I like emails. I like doing administrative things.
The way I see emails is if it's a good enough email, at least it wasn't a meeting. that I had to meet in person for.
True.
Yeah.
Because if you're like, wow, there's so much information in this was really useful. At least I didn't have to go somewhere and sit down and have a 15-minute buffer conversation, then a 15-minute nosy conversation of what's going on, and then finally get to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
And then wasted it. And it's like, oh, this is a beautiful email.
Like,
it's well crafted.
So one reason I think I don't know if I like just feel unproductive, because in my work, I result in weird amount of time. In my 40-hour work week, I always have a portion of that time that is just awkward. Like, oh, I'm doing a centrifuge spin for 3 minutes. What do I do for 3 minutes?
You get on your phone. Yeah, you don't.
Right?
You don't do anything. You just
right.
wait.
But like then I'm like, oh god, like then I'm on my phone, and then like the centrifuge beeps, and I'm like deep in Instagram, and I'm like, this was bad, because like there's a person I listen to, Tom Frank from College Info Geek, that talks about like good distractions and like good mental breaks, and he always says like, don't go on your phone, because then you get lost in these things. Like if you're working, like if you're writing and you need to take a mental break, don't check your email, don't go on your phone, like get up, take a walk, like do something that has like a concrete time, or like if there's one email you needed to answer, like that's your one break, like do something concrete. But that's why I think I feel really, like that's not only the reason I feel impostery, but I think it's because I spend my time in these weird amounts of time, like those 3-minute runs, or like I have 5 minutes before class. What do I do?
Yeah.
And so I end up with these awkward amount of times where I feel like I'm not being productive. And I've heard like time blocking helps with that, but it's inevitable. You're going to just have like awkward time.
Yeah. I want to say 2 things. One is, let's define imposter syndrome for anybody that doesn't know what that is. So imposter syndrome is, maybe from the outside, people see you as very productive and successful and all this stuff. And when they tell you that, internally, you're just like, wow, they don't really know me. I'm not successful at all. I'm not good at this. I don't know anything about this subject, really. And you feel like an imposter. So the second thing I wanted to say is that if you're starting to feel, listeners, if you're starting to feel a little imposter syndrome as you're listening to this, I want to assure you we are all disasters on this podcast.
I'm glorious.
I'm pretty sure you're the first one to say that you did not have your ish together.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but it's all about confidence, guys. If I lie to myself, I might believe it one day.
Yeah, we're not here to tell you that we are perfect, because we are not. So you're in good company, but also we believe in you and we love you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this that we've talked about so far has been, here's things that are out there, here are some of the conversations that have been happening that we're just trying to combine into one vocal notebook, if you will. Okay, so we were talking about imposter syndrome and why you might not feel that you are successful in managing your work and balancing it. And so one of the things that I, in my researching this episode, came across was this concept of the urgency effect and how it can play into reasons why you might struggle, especially as a graduate student. I feel like this is a potentially very applicable concept. So the urgency effect is when our brains tend to prioritize immediate satisfaction over long-term rewards. And we talked about this, right? This is why I really needed to have other projects when my teaching went away, because research is that long-term reward that takes months or years to complete. A PhD takes bare minimum 4 years. Like I've never heard, maybe 3 if you're like a superstar.
Well, in the or a different country.
Maybe also that.
Yeah. The UK, Australia, 3 or 4 years is kind of
still superstar status. But anyway, so this idea of urgency effect came from a February 2018 publication from Zhu Yang and C. We'll link that out also. And they looked at subjects that were more likely to perform urgent, smaller tasks that had a deadline than more important tasks without an immediate time constraint, even if the option to perform the urgent task was objectively worse than performing the larger one. So the researchers in their publication were talking about how people are choosing to perform these urgent tasks with short completion windows rather than these larger outcomes, because important tasks can be really difficult and the goal is further away. And these urgent tasks have this time pressure, which is why a lot of people tend to work well. They say they work well under pressure because they have that urgency effect. And they get, and the payoff is obviously more immediate because they've started working on this closer to the deadline, which means that when they complete it, as the deadline needs to, they get that payoff and that satisfaction a lot faster because they've shoved their work closer to that deadline and that goal. So the point is, even if we know we have a larger, less urgent task that is vastly more consequential, like completing a PhD, we will instinctively choose to do smaller urgent tasks, like sending an email. And so this is like a cognitive problem that people all suffer from.
Is this an example of when like you have to study for an exam and instead you clean your entire house?
Exactly, because you feel really good about cleaning your house. But then you've forced off.
I feel like you just called me out and you didn't even know you did it.
I feel like a lot of
apartment like a crazy person.
No, but I've heard this a lot. Like on every person I've talked to, like your house has never been cleaner than when you have a
something
project.
to do. Yeah.
Or like with proposals. Until I was really fortunate to have my mother show up, and this helped me survive through that. But until she was here, I was like, oh my gosh, like I just convinced myself that my mom coming was so important, even though she was here to like help me study and like live while I was doing my proposal. I was like, oh my gosh, like my mom's coming. I have to clean my house. Like I can't have her see. And she was literally like, Keighley, I'm literally here to just help you. I will clean your house, because that's what she was like here to do, because my mother is a freaking angel.
Yeah, every time I remember, and because I think, I don't know, you don't know how often I think about how sweet it was that your parents came to help during that time. And I was a disaster during mine. Yeah. But I did have to fight that instinct of like, must clean entire house. I was like, no, must live in dirty den of iniquity, and instead study until it's done.
I clean my desk a lot more than anything when I don't want to do something. I was like, I gotta Lysol this. This needs to be sterile.
Well, it's your workspace, so like, of course you have to have the best optimal workspace.
I heard my lab mate sneeze. It must be clean.
So that's just one of the many challenges, is suffering from this urgency effect. And I think acknowledging it can be really helpful, is like, knowing that, okay, I'm distracting myself because I'm looking for this payoff. And so you can find other ways that are helpful. So one thing that I read was a helpful tip for people who have to do a lot of reading. You like you go through an article and you just highlight random spots. And every time you hit a highlight, like you give yourself a Skittle or
you leave
something.
Candy on your paper. It looks so delicious.
Yeah. And so like it's giving yourself these little rewards that help take big, long projects and break them down, or microtasking. So people who write to-do lists, this was also, I think, something I got from College Info Geek. If you have a to-do list, like if you're trying to write a paper, literally write the checklist, open computer, check, done, nice. Open Word, nice, save file, cool. Like you set these like ridiculously small tasks that help your brain get into the progress of like working on whatever you're trying to work on, which helps you sustain progress because you are overcoming this urgency effect. You're giving yourself shorter and shorter deadlines, but they're all in progress. And then your brain, you get into what's called the flow, right? Where you start working really well, your brain is in deep thought, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when you get into that flow, but like getting there is really tough. But that's not the only challenge, to getting it done, is fighting yourself. There are other, we're talking about work-life balance, right? Where those are challenges to getting your work done, but life is not a separate entity.
Yeah, it's just a separate episode.
Yep.
But I think we would be remiss not to at least mention and acknowledge that there are, these subpopulations of grad students that have unique challenges.
Yeah, and so it goes, you have children, or you have a partner, or maybe your family's sick, or you're an underrepresented minority, and doing these work items that we're talking about, you're getting blockaded. Or maybe you have a disability or a learning difference, or maybe you have a super long commute from school because you had another career and now you live closest to the school that you got into, but it's a 45-minute commute each way, etc. We love you all, and you can do it.
Yeah.
And make sure you listen to STEMculture on your long commutes.
But But we really, like we said, these things will be talked about more in depth, but we just would be remiss if we did not bring it up at least a little bit in this episode.
Yeah, well, it's why we have our In STEM episodes as well.
Yes.
So hopefully y'all listen to our last In STEM episode.
Yeah, and if you feel like you fall, you have things to really talk about, like let's say you listen to our work-life balance and you're like, oh my gosh, like I really think I could provide an interesting story of how I have these unique set of challenges and this is how I integrate them. I'm sure it's helpful to people out there to hear people's stories of those things. So we would love to have you share your story with us.
Mm-hmm. So with this episode on work, something I keep in mind is we have so many things on our plates. So how on earth are we really supposed to deal with all these? We're supposed to be lab techs and writers and teachers and students, and then we're also supposed to learn how to conduct ourselves professionally during our PhDs and after our PhDs. Not to mention we have to find a job after our PhD. So, and also, publishing so that we can graduate on time. So this next section here is about our specific time management techniques. And you'll notice each of us have very different techniques. So
we've sprinkled them in so far.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to be hopefully the most helpful portion where we're giving people what is working for us and other options out there. So since I'm already talking, I'll just keep going. So I mentioned up until this point that I have started time blocking. So I use an Excel sheet that I got from Tori, which is a woman that works next door to me. She started doing time blocking, and she was doing it on Google Docs because she liked that she could access it anywhere. But then I'm me, so I have to make everything extra, which means that things are color-coded based on what I put into the box. And you can't do that kind of conditional formatting in Google. So I was doing it in Excel. So like if I look at it, everything that says like it's a lab activity color codes yellow, and everything that's for the podcast is pink, like all these different things. And then at the bottom, I will even then have taken, the kind of the format that was given to me, and I've adjusted it a little bit where, okay, things that have these tags count as work. And so then I can calculate how many hours in doing work or doing SciComm or doing teaching or like having all of these different categories in my life. And then per week, I can look at the percentage of time I spend doing work things, doing personal things, sleeping, which has also been really cool. So that's been really helpful. I've mentioned that I have Google Calendars, and I've heard Zach mention that he lives and breathes by his calendar. I've made the joke that I schedule my friends, but I actually do. Like yesterday, I spent time with a friend, and she's straight up in my calendar. Even though like we made the plan kind of last minute, she still went in the calendar. And I have multiple calendars. I have ones, that for our email, we have a calendar, a Google Calendar for STEMculture, and Brooke is really amazing and puts calendar events on that. And so that gets added to my calendar. And then I've got my work calendar that has all of my seminars and stuff on it. But it helps me make sure I don't forget about events, and that I am blocking my time at least somewhat appropriately. And then I've recently started doing calendar planning with my PI, which is super cool, where I'll send him at the beginning of every month a physical calendar that I've written experimental goals at the bottom. Like, okay, so we have this paper that we're trying to work on. We have these figures that need immediate attention. So I'd write out kind of the goals for each of those experiments, like the big thought process. And then I'd fill in the experiments. On the first day, I'm going to grow my cells. And I think that, it's going to take me a week and a half until I know that they're good and they're clean. I can't do anything until after that. And then maybe I can do some like molecular work. So I'll just throw in exactly what the experiments are and then how long I think they're going to take by just like drawing an arrow. And then I send that to him and I'm like, hey, does this look like I'm on track? Do you think this is also feasible? Because I realized in my first year that I was getting really upset because I was having all these new things on my plate, and I was trying to also do all this research because I'm a grad student now and I have to do all this research. But it took me forever to do anything because I was new and I didn't know how this lab worked, and I was getting super upset. And I had a conversation with my boss, and he's like, yeah, that's normal. You need to stop thinking you can do all these things in a week. Then I'm like, oh, well, now I don't have all these responsibilities. I'm just researching. So then I thought I could like triple my workload. Also not true. Like cells will still grow at the rate that they will grow.
What if you believe in them?
I try. I talk to them, and sometimes I sing to them. not when they're out in the environment, when they're safely somewhere else and they're covered, because
don't breathe on yourself.
Yeah, don't breathe on yourselves. They're so finicky. But, getting a better idea of how long things take already is becoming a bit of a conundrum. But having that as a tool to have these conversations with my PI has been real helpful. So those are kind of the big three, I think, in the ways that I track my time.
And I have a follow-up question for you.
Yeah.
For the time blocking, how do you use that information to help you?
So this kind of, again, ties back into my imposter syndrome. So I realize I've spent too much personal time this week. Okay, I'm not reading articles because I spent 3 hours on my couch watching Netflix. So it's having a balance.
I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, it's a way for me to not just feel guilty without a basis. If I can have a actual number in front of me, I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm not just thinking I'm not doing enough. For me,
there's statistical evidence.
There's actual numbers here, and then I can make a better decision. I can try for a number next week, having an actual goal. So one of the things we might talk about, I'll just talk about it now. SMART goals. Mm-hmm. So they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So for me, if I wanted to, big picture, incorporate more lab work, or spend more time doing lab activities or reading, I consider reading articles as part of my research. So that could be something. So specific goals is decrease the amount of personal time I spend in a week by 2%. And then I can actually see that because I can measure it on my time tracking chart. And I think that's attainable because I'm okay, in the last week, this is how much I spent doing it. Well, in the week before, I was really productive, and this is approximately how much personal time I had. Pick a number between there. It's attainable. It's obviously relevant to my life because I'm trying to become a better grad student and actually do the thing. And it's time-based because I give myself a week to do it. So that's one way in which I think it's helpful. It also helps me just know if I'm sleeping enough. So just knowing that okay, because I'm really trying to be more consistent, going to bed at the same time. And I have an alarm on my phone. Mm-hmm. But to be able to look at it through a week and see the variability in where I'm actually going to bed and when I'm waking up, it's helpful for me. You are a visual person. This has kind of taken it and made it a visual confrontation, but not in a bad way. Just I have to literally be confronted and reckon with, this is how I'm spending my time. Do I like it? Do I not like it?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I, as Keighley mentioned, use my calendar. I schedule pretty much everything for my day, mainly meetings. And anytime he says, can I chat with you about that? It goes on the calendar, even if it's friends. I schedule friends too, no judgment. That's how I've managed my time, is putting it in a calendar. And then when I realize I don't have something there, that's when I go, oh, I should be doing something else. I get distracted and that's where I see I might need to start time blocking everything. I'm oh, well, I should be doing this right now. I have a free moment. I should be doing this. And then maybe structuring it more around oh, well, you need to get here at 9 o'clock during the day and leave at 6 and then maybe come back later. Hopefully not, because that's already a full day's work. But if I don't get anything done, there's that guilt that sets in. And so I too have had stress dreams. I've been reorganizing things in my sleep and I don't know why. And I don't know what I'm organizing, probably a paper or something like that. But me, from this conversation right now, I see that I really need to do better at time management. I need something to say, hey, stop messing around on the internet and do your job. Or do something it's not a fear of writing, it's a loathing of it. And I don't want to do it because I know that this is kind of my starting point. I'll get better at it, but I feel nothing's good enough. And that's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole episode. Or
to be fair, podcast. Writing is never good enough. You just get to a point where you're I think this is done.
Submit it. And that's where I'm at. Is I keep changing and I keep changing. And then it feels like I don't go anywhere. And then I'm well, then I'm not going to spend time on that anymore, which is the mistake I've been making recently. So don't do that. Spend time on stuff.
Yeah, when you get to that kind of brick wall on writing, send it to somebody, a lab mate, a friend.
A stranger. Put it on your calendar.
Even your parents, because they might be I actually was able to follow up until this point, and then I couldn't, your methods didn't make any sense to me, which for parents might be okay. But they might be like, you lost me here. And that they can really help with kind of clarity.
So that's something that I've noticed now, is that I don't have the right focus on my own stuff. And I do block everything, but it's not enough. Mm-hmm. And so I need to have somebody. I've told my lab mates, I had a sign next to my desk that says, I have blocked this time for writing, but I know I am very bad at doing that. And so underneath it says, if you find me distracted, throw something at me. They've only done it twice. And I gave them all either tennis balls or stress balls so they could throw them at me.
Oh, tennis ball could hurt though.
I need the encouragement.
Negative reinforcement for Zach.
There you go. So, and how do you manage it, Dani?
Okay, so about a year ago, I started, it's not like I was purposefully looking for this kind of stuff to make my time management better, but I just happened to start listening to some podcasts, and one of them in particular, which is The Startup Scientist by Dan Quintana.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so there hasn't been any updates for about a year, but there's a lot of content there, and he talks very much about workflow and how you can really structure your time when you're at work to be super efficient. And he's found that he can really do no more than 5 hours of concentrated work in a day. And that's to do with, he has other meetings and stuff he has to go to, but it's also just how much he can physically handle in a day. And so I thought, let me see if I can try out some of these techniques he talks about. And I find them all incredible. Well, maybe not all of them, but I find many of them very, very useful.
Before you get into that, can you define what concentrated work actually, like what is the Dan Quintana talking about when he means concentrated work?
Oh, I don't know if that's the term he used.
How are you interpreting that? Just so we have a very clear understanding.
Yeah, so it's where maybe you're at your computer, or I don't know if you're doing lab work, but when you're working, that is all you are doing. Okay. So if you're at your computer and you're supposed to be writing, that is all you're doing. You're not on your phone, you're not on your email, you're not doing anything else but focusing on writing. Okay. As an example.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure that was clear before we heard these awesome tips that are sure to come.
Yeah. So one of the techniques he talks about that is pretty popular is the Pomodoro technique. And so this technique is basically you're like, I need to work on this thing and I'm going to work on it for 25 minutes. That's kind of the standard time. And so you literally set up a timer and you work for 25 minutes. And then once that timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break. And then maybe you can do several sessions of a Pomodoro. So maybe you do 25 minutes, 5-minute break, 25 minutes on, 5-minute break, and then maybe one more, and then you take a longer break. Then it really helps you focus. And I've found it, for me, it helps me focus a lot. But 25 minutes is just an example time. So in my writing groups, we do 50 minutes at a time. Because for me, 25 minutes writing, that's right when I've hit my groove and I don't want to stop yet. Because there's other people in the room and I cannot sometimes work in my lab. Mm-hmm. I have many lab mates and it's none of their faults, but sometimes it just gets really busy in there. And so I really need to leave if I'm going to get any kind of writing done. So for my writing groups, I leave that room. I've reserved a room somewhere else, and I meet like-minded people that also want to write during that time. And then we do the 50 minutes on, 10 minutes off, 50 minutes on again.
Does it also help to have people who are working near you? Yes. I found that I had a roommate once who, whenever she was around and was working, I found myself to be infinitely more productive because I'm like, oh, well, she's working.
She's making me look bad. I got to fight.
Well, I think a little bit of it really could be like, oh gosh, well, they look like they're really focused. So I really shouldn't, I want to check this thing that is not related to my writing, but I won't. So that has worked for me really well. And I did start keeping track of how much writing I was doing and on what topics or maybe what papers, so I could keep track of how many hours I gave a paper or an application so that I can feel good about myself, essentially.
Are there any other reasons you keep track of that other than that gratification?
No.
Okay. It also might be helpful to be like, on average, this is how much writing time it takes me to turn out a paper. So the next time your PI asks you to write, you can be like, okay, I anticipate it taking me this many hours, which could be really helpful if you're trying to produce multiple papers, you can give them a more accurate timeline, knowing how many hours it took you.
Yeah, and that's a really fantastic point. I've only been keeping track for a semester, and so I write 2 hours every day, Monday to Friday. And there's sometimes when other things come up, but I protect that time like crazy. And if you try to schedule something with me during that time, I'm not going to do it. Now, there are a few times where I'll make exceptions if it's like a once a semester kind of thing, and I'll be like,
Yeah, like
okay,
there's a really great speaker or something.
Yeah, or I want to volunteer at the museum. So that's going to happen next Friday. So then I'll make the exception. But besides that, it's not happening. What's really important is also keeping up to date with the literature. And people have many different ways. I know Keighley is looking tortured. There's a lot of different ways to do that. But I think one of the easiest ways I've found is to set up Google Alerts. Yeah. Or Google Scholar Alerts.
Or also Scopus. Want to throw that in the ring.
These show notes are going to be intense. We will link literally everything. Okay. So for Google Scholar Alerts, what you can do is you go to Google Scholar, and you can actually set up specific phrases that if they appear, specific words, if they appear in a new article that's come out that Google Scholar has indexed, you will get an email about it. And so sometimes, I have word phrases that send me a lot of crap. And so if you find that, then you can get rid of those ones and make it a better phrase. But that helps me so much keep on top of the literature. Now, the only problem with the Google Scholar Alerts is that if you get these emails, you do need to actually go through them and figure out what papers are there and what you want to look at and what you don't.
That could be like a time block, though. It's like, at the beginning of every week, you spend an hour and a half just going through.
Oh, it's not that much time.
Or
I'm sorry.
20 minutes. I don't know.
Yeah.
My boss does that. He actually gets those alerts and he gets them all sent to a folder. And then at the beginning of every month, he goes through that folder. So that's probably where I was getting the hour and a half, because he spends a whole month collecting literature.
And is he actually reading it, or is he actually seeing what is going to be useful in?
So he goes through the articles that are sent to him, and he categorizes them into skim it. Because it's like an interesting idea, or it might just be kind of conceptually helpful. And then, so that's one category. There's a share with the students category where he wants us to do it and report back to him. And because he thinks that it's very helpful for our particular research. And then he has a spend a lot of time annotating, really deeply understanding it category.
Okay.
So that's how he does that, because he uses papers, which is just like a Zotero or an EndNote or a Mendeley to help him kind of categorize that.
Okay, that's super helpful, because I think I do need a little bit more help there with how, what to do with these papers once I have them. Because what I've done is there's an app you can get called Pocket, and it will... and you can just download it to your phone, and you can open a website basically and then save it to Pocket, and then you can open it up in a web browser on your laptop later. And then you can address whatever the heck you wanted to do with that website. So I use Pocket, and then I do spend time once a month with Pocket, and I go through and make sure that I know where I want to put things. So Keighley just mentioned some citation managers, and citation managers are hugely helpful. So before citation managers, people had to do all their citations by hand, which is a fucking waste of time. Yeah. And it's really irritating, and it just takes so much time. I had to do that for my master's, and I think paper citation software existed at that point, but I just didn't know how to use it. And I didn't really know. Yeah, it's really worth the time. So the two most popular free ones are Zotero and Mendeley, and we'll link both of those. And our university has workshops with Zotero, so I can actually go and get some help setting it up in a way that's going to be useful for me. But your university might have something else that they like. Or Zach and I were talking about this earlier. If you want to take that away, Zach.
So make sure you're using the same citation software that your advisor uses. Particularly that, if I use Zotero, the database I produce is not compatible with EndNote. That was what my advisor uses. So I have to make sure that we use the same software. That way, while we're writing, citations are managed properly, and I don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, or for me, I use Zotero, and my advisor, I actually don't know what he uses. I think he was looking into Zotero as a potential thing he might want to use, but I just tell him, don't delete any of the references. If you don't want them, leave a comment, and that has been working for us. But I will link, because the internet is amazing, there's really a whole matrix of paper citation software comparisons, and you can see what works for you and what your friends might have experience with, or what your advisor might have experience with.
So even just one might not work for you. So like our university provides us with EndNote, and I found for my personal, like when I was writing my proposal, EndNote communicated a lot better with Word in terms of like making updates as I would like add a citation, whereas Zotero for me at the time was not as easy, but I like Zotero's format for like my day-to-day. So there might need to be a combination, and like on my iPad when I read papers I use the Papers app. So it's a little annoying having things in 3 places, but I have a very specific like use for them. So like I'm never on EndNote unless I have selected my papers that I'm going to use for my manuscript, and then I only am like in EndNote, which helps me keep things just mentally separate. So these are papers I'm just consuming versus papers I'm actually using, versus papers I'm in the middle of reading on the go. So there may just need to be, there may be a combination that works best for people too.
Yeah. And knowing yourself will be very helpful too, because I know for myself, if I have more than one, I will just die. I will lose track of stuff. And I will, I don't function well that way, but Keighley is very high functioning in the organization part of things. And I am not. I really struggle with
we complement each other organizationally.
We do. We like to joke that Keighley is type A and I am type B in terms of personality types.
But I'm wearing off on you. You're becoming an AB.
A B plus, perhaps. Okay, and so the very last thing for workflow is one of the things I'm most happy about is that I can make my own graphs in R, and they look very nice and they are repeatable. So learning code early on could be really important for you. And there are ways in Excel to make really nice graphs. So I'm not knocking on Excel. And if you know Excel well, then you might not want to waste time learning a programming language. But for me, I started learning R several years ago, and being able to have control over graphs in that program was really helpful for me. Not only that, but also analysis and just overall data management. And then, of course, there's obviously a ton of other programming languages, but I like R because it's really, really great for visualizations and graphs and all that. So after taking up all of that time, I will kind of back off from all those details of workflow and just say, for me in general, what helps me very much is planning ahead, which is why I made the timeline for the graduate students here in our department, because that helps me keep big timelines in mind.
Yeah, I think that's the common denominator, at least between what you and I, and even Zach are saying. Like, that's why we use calendars, because it helps us look at things from a broad perspective. That's why I send calendars to my PI at the beginning of every month, because we take these big steps back, which I think are super important. And you're really the champion of reminding us to have these big goals and taking a step back and being like, okay, what progress have you made on those big goals?
And then the last thing I do is, whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, which is frequent enough that I do this at least once a week, is I make lists. And they're kind of to-do lists, but it's also just to get everything that's in my brain out onto paper. Because it might be in my calendar, but having it in a to-do list that I can actually mark things off is really helpful for me too. And it helps me plan out. I do this for semesters, like what are my goals for the entire semester? And then I'll do monthly goals too. Like for January, I want to get this done. And then there's some times where you have control over that. Like my writing groups, I feel like I have a fair amount of control over how much time I spend in those. And then other times I don't have control, like if I want to do lab work and something is not functioning right, or I forgot to order solvent in December, so we don't have solvent right now in my lab, then, that's kind of my bad, and I can't really control all of the aspects of that, so I have to let it go. But it helps me just get things out of my brain and onto paper, so that as a visual person, I can see what's next.
That's 100% true. I was filling out my individual developmental plan NIH requires it now.
Okay.
And one of the things that they said is it's really important for you to get your ideas out of your brain, because your brain is really good at generating ideas. It's not good at holding on to them. Mm-hmm. And I read that as like, oh my gosh, that's like so true, right? Especially because like we're being trained to think really deeply and like intricately. And now we're like, also remember to like reach out to this person. Yeah. That's going to get so easily lost in the shuffle. So your advice to put things in a physical place where you can reference it is, I think, spot on.
Yeah. And then overall, if you need help doing something, or like Zach's having trouble with the writing portion. And so he's taken steps, which I think is really great, to make Tuesdays and Thursdays his writing time so that he's not disturbed. And then, you know, like I've already mentioned, for me, I need to write outside of my lab, but I am not good at writing at home. So that's something I know about me. But you can have groups. So we have writing groups, but then somebody else recently was like, hey, I want to find grants. So she decided to create a grant writing group where the first hour is looking for grants and second hour is writing outlines for those grants. So whenever you are trying to do something, see if other people want to do that too. And then you can meet up and maybe that will be enough to help you move forward with it.
Accountability, buddy.
A support group for this is really, really important. Yeah. Otherwise you'll never do it.
So one thing that kind of ties in with what we've been talking about is this idea of deep work. And we've been really kind of scoodling around it without, you know, calling it by name. It's this concept of deep work versus shallow work. And it was originally coined, this concept, by Cal Newport in 2016. He wrote a book that basically talks about how he focuses on things. So the idea of deep work, exactly what you were saying before, Dani, is when you're focusing without distraction, like you were saying in Dan Quintana's podcast, it's that concentrated work. It's the same thing that Cal is talking about, is deep work, where you're locked into doing something and you're refusing to like let go of it. Dog with a bone style, like you really got to just dig in. And in this book, he talks about a couple of interesting things like task switching, and that results in something. I like having words for things, or like terms for things, which is why I'm bringing this up kind of in a somewhat redundant way. So when you task switch, so when you're writing and I'm just going to check this email really quick, you result in something called attention residue, where it takes time to get back into it, right? Yeah. And like this is all a concept, I'm sure it's like not novel to hear about, but for me, just like having a word justifies it and like allows me to control it. Like, you know, it's like name your demons. So it's the idea if you keep yourself in a state of persistent attention residue, you end up draining your brain really quickly because you're expending all this energy on just pulling yourself back into things. And so Cal discusses 4 rules of helping you do deep work, and I'm sure they align very similarly with what Dan Quintana was talking about. But 2 that he really, that I think are really common for people. I was getting off of social media. That's like a big drain, especially considering that's how a lot of us network now. That's how we stay in touch with people. That's how we keep our pulse on the latest and greatest. And that's really difficult. So some people will just go and decide not to do social media, but personally, I don't think that's an option for our generation. Long term.
As Zach hangs his head because he's not on social media.
I mean, that could be anything from like just having a LinkedIn account to creating your website to being on Twitter daily. You know, it could be anything. But to not have any access to that, I think it could be really difficult. But because of these, again, urgency effect, going back to words that we're introducing to this podcast, you go on to Twitter and you like, you get a little bit of a high because somebody maybe liked your post, or you can retweet somebody and then you feel like, I've accomplished something. Like I went on and I networked today. You can kind of, you know, justify these things and making yourself feel good about it.
And someone liked my post, so that's positive reinforcement. So I'm going to do it again.
Yeah.
You drug addict.
I mean, well, it is addictive though.
But that was, so really just being like, I think really aware of that, and understanding that we can really be easily manipulated by social media. And in the book, Cal talks about the reason he effectively started with deep work was because of this problem, and how, because of this conversation, a lot of people have become this, apparently there's a digital minimalism movement, which just is kind of like time blocking your social media. So you only allow yourself between certain hours of the day to go
I'm really
on.
good at that.
You're so good at it. You don't even have any hours.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question about the deep work stuff?
Absolutely.
Because I feel like with the workflow stuff I talked about before, it helps me be really efficient so that I can do a 40-hour work week because I'm spending time doing deep work in a way that means I don't necessarily have to spend 8 hours a day writing. I can do 2 hours and then do other stuff. So does, what's this guy's name again?
Cal Newport.
Does he talk about that at all? Like, has it been shown that with deep work you can do more in the same amount of time?
Yeah.
In less time?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's been like I don't know if he has the numbers, but based on his theory and a couple of anecdotes that he presents in his in the book, because if you do deep work, you do not have things like that attention residue. You become more productive. So if you have an 8-hour work day and you're constantly flipping between tasks, you end up losing a bigger chunk of that work day.
Okay.
To adjusting to making task switches.
Yeah.
Whereas if you focus for 2 hours, you're unlikely to have that level of work if you are switching back and forth. Mm-hmm. So if you were to give yourself 3 hours, you would lose effectively an hour of that by attention switching, by not doing it as deep work.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, so that's one. Another one, so that sometimes, you know how when you start thinking about something and then all of your conversations start happening and people start giving you advice on this thing that you're working on, or like you hear another podcast or read a book about things that are like relevant. This has happened to me. So I was listening to a different podcast and they were talking about Randy Zuckerberg's Pick 3. Mm-hmm. And the women on the podcast kind of had mixed reviews, but I think conceptually it's a really interesting idea. So this was a New York Times bestseller, and the theory is very simple. You have categories in your life and you pick 3 of them. So you set up 5 categories and you literally just pick 3.
I'm looking at Zach right now because he mentioned this in our bureaucracy episode.
There were 3 points. You could only pick 2.
It's very similar to the triangle option.
So that was the
very
pentagon.
similar. Right. And the 5 categories proposed in the book are work, which are projects you give time and get value, sleep, family, either you're given or you're chosen, friends, which is she uses as a catch-all for pleasure activities, which is separate from work and family, and fitness, which is all areas of wellness. And the conversation from the podcast that I heard was these aren't really great categories for like the average person. Randy Zuckerberg has like a lot of Facebook money. And so she's able to kind of delegate a lot of the necessary tasks, like clean your house. And also it's kind of obvious we're going to work and we're going to sleep. Mm-hmm. But one way that as a graduate student, we could adjust that is, okay, we have 5 categories of work. You know, we have writing, we have teaching, we have classwork, we have research, we have, like mentoring or something. And you, per day, it's not even like you don't pick 3 just forever, right? Every day you decide that you're going to commit yourself to 3 of those things.
Okay.
And so like if you're like today is going to be a writing day, or a mentoring day, and a research day. Like I know my undergrad is going to come in, so I'm going to spend actual time with them today. Whereas like maybe I'm not going to spend time doing those other 2 tasks, but then you make up for it. And the big key to this is tracking it, which might be, you know, you might do it the way that I do it on an Excel sheet where you track which things so that you have a rotating schedule so that nothing gets stuck by the wayside. And it gives you a really good broad view. So that's one thing I thought would be really interesting. And I like that because it allows you to make these decisions kind of like guilt-free. Like, well, nope, I picked these things today. And if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can you help me with this thing? And you didn't pick it, you can be like, tomorrow. Yes. Tomorrow I've already delegated as a writing day. So yes, I will write. Or, you know, if you want to consider editing as part of that, like, oh, well, sure, I will read your paper because that fits into my writing. And that's also a really helpful way if you want to just talking about it from a work perspective, help choose your time and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's really cool because I think, you know, Zach talking about it in episode 3,
Sure.
just, well, kind of intuitively assigning those, and then with the idea of like some days have certain things, we were just talking too about Zach, and like Tuesdays and Thursdays are going to be your writing days now. So I think it's cool that a lot of these are kind of intuitive, but then we learn more about them and we can use them.
Yeah, I think these all kind of have a little bit of overlap because they're all based in a good idea, right? It's all conscious use of time.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think one kind of mental switch you have to make is this is time management, not a sacrifice. And that's what I've seen it is like. I've always said it, like, I sacrifice that third point of the triangle and I'm not going to do that. But in this point is I'm going to manage that later so that I can do what I need to do today and manage that time.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing, so this actually came up in a lab meeting originally, which kind of made me remember this. So there is a famous quote from Dwight Eisenhower that says, "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." And this goes into play in what's called the Eisenhower box, where you draw a 4-quadrant box, and we'll include an image of this, where along the top, the first one says urgent, and then the first column says urgent, the second column says not urgent, and then the first row is labeled as important, and the second one is labeled as not important. And if you're having a hard time deciding on tasks, like if you have a research day or you're looking at a long-term goal that you're trying to figure out where tasks fall, or even just responding to tasks as they come into you, or somebody sends you an email, it's like, hey, I actually need this really last minute, and it's somebody you can't really say no to. It helps you really keep track of where things lie. So in our lab, we kind of redid the traditional box. So the traditional box says that things are both important and urgent you need to do today. Things that are important but not urgent, you have to schedule a time to do in the future. Things that are urgent but not important, you find someone else to do for you, if you can. And things that are neither urgent or not important, you must delete. And really you need to really assess. If you don't think it's urgent or important, it needs to not be on your plate right now. And so in the lab, we kind of came up with a new system where we're aiming for our projects to be in the important but not urgent category. So instead of, where we're scheduling it out, but that's really where we want our projects to be. We don't want to be responding last minute because that's a stressful environment for research. Is like, oh crap, I need this figure for this publication that's going out, or for this grant that my PI is writing. Like, I have to suddenly do this and drop everything. It's really stressful. So we're not aiming to have our tasks be in that box. We're aiming for them to be important tasks, but not urgent. And then another thing we talked about is if they're urgent tasks, but not super important at the moment, like a meeting that came up last minute, it might not be considered very, very important to you, but you have to be there. Those are draining tasks. Those are things that take away from your time. And so we're trying not to have a lot of things there. We're trying to schedule our meetings where they are not urgent. We know about them in the future, and they're not reactionary. And then also, we concurred with the traditional Eisenhower box that things that are neither urgent or important should not happen. I think when we did it, my PI just wrote a giant X in that box. It's like, nope, tasks don't go there. It's a really interesting concept. I'm going to try to implement it this semester to help me, because I have a really bad problem with I receive tasks and then I immediately do them.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's kind of taking your list idea, but for me, like categorizing them, which helps me respond to them better, rather than like because I've done the list thing, but I just will pick and choose the things I want to do.
Yeah.
So if I can put them in these boxes as I receive them, then it'll help me not feel bad about doing them later, because I know they're written down, I know they'll get done, but then the things that actually need to get done will.
Yeah.
Like, no, Keighley, you have to run this Western today.
Yeah.
Like, that's it's not great that it's urgent, but today it has become urgent because I moved it from my not urgent to my urgent for today list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brooke talks a lot about swallowing the frog.
Yeah.
Which is a phrase I never heard before her, but she swears other people know it. But it's the idea that if there's a list of things that you're supposed to do, just start with the one that you don't want to fucking do, because it still has to get done. So just do it, and then it'll be such a relief. And it'll be so great. And then doing the rest of the stuff won't be as bad. But just getting that first thing off the plate, the one that you don't do, that you've been avoiding for perhaps weeks.
Yeah.
just get her done.
Yeah, you know, like for me, it's writing, which is why I'm glad that writing groups are in the morning time, because I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna do it. Just gonna do it.
Yeah.
But that's also, you know, in the Swallow the Frog, the first time it came up is when I was doing proposals and I was not working on them like I should have been. And it was so nice to have an accountability buddy for that. So I was talking about having an accountability buddy, but sometimes you have so many things that you just cannot have somebody who's helping you keep track of your shit. Like, that's just not, I think, fair to ask people. But, like, to have the Swallow the Frog tasks have an accountability buddy, then, like, you can tell someone, hey, this is going to be the task that I'm really going to struggle with. And so you celebrate even harder. Like, I remember I sent you guys a picture of me, like, finished my first article.
Yes.
And it was such an achievement. And you guys were, like, so happy and so proud of me doing, like, the thing. It's, like, dumb because, like, obviously I need to do it.
Yeah.
But just, like, get that, like, overjoy made me feel so good that I'm like, okay, I really did do it. Like, I can just keep doing it, even though it's, like, obnoxious. It shouldn't have been celebrated that much. But just acknowledging, like, this was hard for me. It was really hard for me to have to start this, and just getting the feedback from others being like, we know.
Yeah.
And we are so happy that you did this.
Yeah. And a lot of times, too, once you get over that hump of doing whatever that one thing was that you really didn't want to, sometimes it doesn't even take that long. And it was just irritating, and now it's done. Like Brooke in writing group yesterday, she was like, okay, this whole thing is going to take me 2 hours, and that's my goal for today. And I said, okay. And then, like, during our break for after the first 50 minutes, she was like, so that actually ended up only taking me 5 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, so you're not getting a check mark today because you're not, how did you not know that was going to take only 5 minutes? But it's because she'd been avoiding it.
Right, and it becomes this beast.
Yeah. I didn't give her a check mark. I'm bad.
Thank you so much for listening. Next time, we'll be talking about life, parenting, partnerships, and death with Brooke, Will, and Dani.
You can find us on Twitter at STEMculture, one word, or email us at STEMculturepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we're doing, please rate us on iTunes to help other people find us. Please do that. We don't have any ratings yet. Love you. If you'd like to support us, you can find our Patreon on our website, plus our show notes, like the copious show notes that will exist for today, articles to stimulate, and links to our YouTube channel for transcribed shows at www.stemculturepodcast.com.
Until next time, don't forget to consensually hug a grad student, or at least buy them coffee.
Sort of thing. If you can name it.
Beelzebub.
Jimothy.
It's not a real demon.
Lucifer.
So, okay, better. That's a fallen angel. That's fine.
Gurgle Sledge. I don't know.
Sorry,
I don't know
distracted.
any demons. My brother. No, Colin, I'm sorry.
She's not sorry. The look on her face says she doesn't. We'll delete that.